When she was little, her disability was essentially invisible. I used American Sign Language, which we had been told to learn some when she was little to communicate. So here's the thing that I feel ambivalent about. What this did was signal to the adult who should have known better, who was staring at us, that my kid isn't acting out. I'm not a sucky permissive parent. My kid has a disability. So I would communicate with sign language, not because my daughter needed it. She has 100% receptive language. She understands everything that is said to her. So that, when she was little, felt okay. But it's really about making that person comfortable, not about my comfort or my daughter's comfort.
Welcome to Atypical Kids Mindful Parents Podcast, the neurodiversity affirming parenting podcast that helps parents feel less alone. I'm Kate Lynch, a mindfulness coach and parent of an amazing atypical kid. I interview parents and experts who share my mission to create a kinder, more inclusive future. You can look forward to grounding practices, relatable parenting stories, and groundbreaking strategies. Let's go on this journey together. Jennifer Natalya Fink is director of the program in disability studies and a professor of English at Georgetown University. She's the author of All Our Families, Disability Lineage, and the Future of Kinship. It came out March 2022 from Beacon Press, as well as 6 other books, and also founder of the Gorilla Press, a nonprofit promoting youth literacy through bookmaking. Fink is the winner of the Dana Award for the novel and the finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. First and foremost, she's a mother. The transformative experience of parenting her autistic daughter is the center of her work. I first met Jennifer when I was interviewing her for her book, All Our Families, which had a huge impact on my life. So I can't wait for you to meet Jennifer Natalya Fink. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kate. I'm really excited to be here.
The first time we talked, it was to interview you for the Mother magazine piece. We promised that we would be announcing a book giveaway. I'm so excited to talk to you about helping parents to value their child's disability, explore their own family's disability lineage, because we all have disability lineage, whether we know it or not. That's what I learned from your book. And to view disability as an identity. So that might be a lot for parents to unpack. Do you know where you would like to start with that?
Yeah, I think when our kid gets a diagnosis, we try to be good parents. We go to all the doctors, the OTs, the PTs, all the T's, right? And that's great. That's important. But what those clinicians usually don't say is that this is an identity, that disability is an identity. And if anything, parents are pressured to assimilate, to mainstream, and there's a positive side that's integration, right? But there's a negative piece of that in which you're encouraged to disidentify with your kid's disability. I've met parents who can't say the word autistic and their kids had the diagnosis for a decade. And what that communicates to your child, talk about what that does to you as a parent, but let's talk about what that does to your child, is tell them that who they are intrinsically is not okay, is less than, and that their difference has no value, has no positive value or meaning, that all it is a deficit. And they're not to look to other people who share this identity for empowerment, community, etc., but to people who don't. And if you put in any other identity, a racial minority, sexual minority, that sounds horrific to most parents, right? But around disability, we're still doing that because of ableism, which is the valuing of some bodies and minds over others, instead of valuing all body, minds, and all their complicated diversity, which doesn't mean resisting treatment, which doesn't mean I want people to be in pain or anything like that. A disability is a permanent state, and it's an identity. not an illness to be cured. That's something else, overlap. But I think there's a conflation of those two things. And there's very little recognition of what in disability justice and disability culture circles is called disability gain, that there are things of value to be gained by people who have disabilities that the rest of us can learn from and benefit from. Distinctive, unique ways of seeing the world. Accommodations for disabilities help everybody. We call this curb cut gain, for example, which all of us parents who've been there with the baby buggy, you'll note that by law, there's a cut in the curb for wheelchair users, but all of us parents benefited from that. So when things are made more accessible for disabled people, they actually help everybody.
Especially here in New York City, we use those cuts all the time.
So it helps everybody and helps value all our diverse body mind. So it has implications for everybody. So that's the big global thing, is to stop looking at this as a disease, to not only focus on impairment, but on gain and just the particularity of your particular child. And then the second piece is looking instead of feeling like this is unprecedented. I know that's how I felt. Yeah. And I'm queer. I consider myself an alternative kind of person. Nobody has ever accused me of being a conformist. Let's just put it that way.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, but I felt unmoored, cut off from the norms of parenting and family when my kid was diagnosed. I felt isolated, and it felt very unprecedented because of the way disability had been delineated from my family. And my book talks about the particularities of my story, which isn't that important. What's important is to start learning about disability in your family, both people who may have had your kid's particular diagnosis, but let's say your kid is like hit by a car or something. And so it's not genetic, it's not biological, it's not inherited. There were other disabled people in your family, maybe without that exact same disability, right? But understanding all the variations of bodies and minds in your family will help you value and appreciate and normalize your family's and your kids' experience. And that's something you owe to your kid and you owe to yourself. For both of you, for everybody in the family. And if you say, I don't think anybody in my family did have a disability, or I'm adopted, or
we may not know those stories because maybe they were either institutionalized or some other traumatic thing happened and nobody told those stories because of stigma and shame.
But often, here's the thing, even if you have a hunch that somebody was in the story and then they weren't, or what happened, you're nodding because everybody has this. So much of it is retrievable, is what I found in public records, the internet, ancestry.com, and just by asking. And there are ways to ask. And when you start talking about it, what I found is by being out about my kid's disability, naming it and claiming it, not saying my kid's quirky or delayed or all these euphemisms, special. She's not special. She's very ordinary and normal. She's not a genius. She's not special. She's a kid, right? Who's autistic. That's who she is. And that's one facet of who she is. And it can't be separated from the other facets. She's a really good poet. She has a ridiculous sense of humor. She's messy. She's all kinds of things that cannot be separated from her autism and can't be collapsed down to it. And that's true of all kids, right? The particularity of who she is has to do with her disability and isn't identical to it. As soon as I started being out about it, first of all, everyone at my job, I'm a professor, all these professors started telling me about their disabled kids. And it turned out almost everybody had disability in their family. And then I started digging into my family's story to understand why there was so much stigma and shame around disability and why I felt so cut off. And I found that there was one story I knew about, my cousin XY, I call him, who'd been sent away at birth. Where did he go? Actually, I could find out. All of that's retrievable. And then I actually found a whole other cousin who I didn't know about, who'd had a much more positive life of integration, who also had Down syndrome, as in Rona. So finding that story was really empowering. And then, so there's the finding the sort of lost, cut off, unspeakable, unspoken, and to speak about them. Wow. Then there's another piece, which is about the disabilities in our family that we don't name and claim and such. And I talk about my mother and my grandmother's hearing impairment. They're both hard of hearing. And my grandmother, it really defined her life and limited her. She had no positive identity as a disabled person. She was disgusted by disabled children because I think she felt so much shame about herself. She didn't know sign language. She didn't lip read. She was very cut off and isolated, and a lovely person who loved me more than anybody. But thinking of her as deaf, it was unspeakable in my family, even though it completely structured who she was in the world and in our family. And then my mother became increasingly hearing impaired. She wants me to always say, she was very annoyed that I don't make this distinction in the book, but only in her 60s did she become truly deaf. She uses every hearing aid imaginable. She got a PhD. She raised 2 children. She lip reads. She's socially brilliant. She's the family empath because she plays close attention to what everyone's saying so she doesn't miss a word. And she was afraid of turning into her mother and being cut out. But what she didn't have is any positive identity as a deaf person or hearing impaired person. She was ashamed of it. We made fun of her. I made fun of her. Not proud of it. And she worked so hard to hear. And she had no solidarity or identity with other hard of hearing impaired deaf people. So that is a huge thing for me to name and claim. In some ways, that was harder to do, both for me to see that as disability and to do the work that neither my mother nor grandmother were willing to, in a way of thinking of that as disability, because I was always afraid of being deaf.
Yeah.
So I think that there's sort of 2 pieces of that disability lineage. One is who's been cut out of the story and maybe cut out of the family, and who is in the family and in the story, but not claimed and named as disabled because of stigma.
Speaking of stigma and shame, one of the points of this podcast is to help parents feel less alone. My ultimate aim is to help parents be calmer and more present with their kids so that we can create a more inclusive future. I feel like it starts with that granularity. So do you have a favorite story that shows your vulnerability and or how you learned from a challenge that you had with your daughter?
Yeah, I think one I come back to a lot is about being disabled in public. And this is particularly for parents of kids who are neurodiverse and may behave in unusual ways that are not harmful to themselves.
Right. Yeah. Like stimming, things that are much easier to handle in the privacy of our own home, but in the grocery store.
But partly because there's still this idea that disabled people don't deserve to be in public.
Right.
Behaviors that harm nobody, disrupt nothing. So I'm not talking about harmful, disruptive behaviors. That is a whole other issue. I'm talking about behaviors that are unusual, sounds, behaviors, etc., that do not harm anybody, but stand out. What I found was when she was little, her disability was essentially invisible. She was not perceived as disabled. And I used American Sign Language, which we had been told to learn some to communicate. Yeah. So here's the thing that I feel ambivalent about. What this did was signal to the adult who should have known better, who was staring at us, that my kid isn't acting out. I'm not a sucky, permissive parent. My kid has a disability. So I would communicate with sign language, not because my daughter needed it. She has 100% receptive language. She understands everything that is said to her. And this is not her mother's assessment. This is the neuropsych's assessment. So that, when she was little, felt okay. But it's really about making that person comfortable, not about my comfort or my daughter's comfort. That's the problem with that. Now she's older. She doesn't want me to do that. She's like, I don't need sign language. So now we negotiated a little differently, where I will say to the person, my child has a disability, give us some space or something like that.
And is your daughter okay with that?
The other thing, first I say, we're fine, which means there's not a problem here. Why are you staring? And that works some of the time. It's never other children, by the way, or teenagers. It's actually adults. It's so interesting to me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do resort to the sign language. Again, not for my daughter, for the public. So what I'm doing on another level with this book and with sort of my life's work is changing the conversation and the culture so that being disabled in public becomes a normal part of life, just like being queer in public, being a person of color in public should not in any way be something to cause attention or distrust anybody. There's a long history of policing disabled bodies and minds in public that's wound around racism, and it needs to end. So that's what I'm working towards. But in those moments, that's something I have to negotiate. And every time it's challenging. I won't lie to you. But I think because my daughter has a strong identity as a disabled person and has community, she also has experiences in public with other disabled people. And I think that's really important. That's another piece of that community part, is being a part of a community in public, right?
Is there a story you could share about being with other disabled people in public? That's like that joyful story? Maybe?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, we went to a birthday party recently of her best friend who's also non-speaking autistic, and there were a bunch of kids who were non-speaking autistic kids at the party, and it was outside, like a beer garden kind of place that serves Mexican food, not a bar. It was like an outdoor rowdy space. There was another group of adults hanging out, making more noise than we were. And I felt them staring, and we were just doing our thing, having fun, having a birthday party. And gradually they stopped. They stared when there were a few of us, when we were sort of outnumbering them. The dynamics changed a little. So it's a small thing, but I think being disabled in public collectively is really important. And I think that's the whole thing the medical establishment misses, because they're in this disease cure individual model. Go to your doctor and OT, PT, all the T's for medical treatment. That is what they know. What they don't know how to do is help your kid develop identity.
And they certainly don't know how to help us develop identity and community.
Not at all. So I think that's the wrong place to look for advice on that. So I think being disabled in public is really important. At the same time, our kids are kids, and we do want to shield them from the ableism. It's a complicated negotiation between your kid learning to be a self-advocate, learning to stand up for themselves, and protecting them from the ableism. And there's no formula, there's no perfect way. What we really have to do is just change not what's acceptable for kids' behavior, what's acceptable for society's behavior. That's the ABA that it's really needed, is for the ableism, not for my kid, actually.
As they get older, they become more and more aware. Maybe my son was aware long ago, but now he will totally call us out. Say he rides his scooter through a group of people, right? And we're, ooh, I should apologize, or, oh, I'm so embarrassed that my son did that. But he didn't hurt anyone. He's just like a little less conscious of spatial boundaries that they have. So we'll mutter like, I'm sorry, as we walk through. He's like, do not ever apologize for me. And I'm like, you're right. I'm sorry. I have a lot to learn. I still have a lot of internalized ableism myself.
Yep. We all do. And our kids really can help us with that in a way. But yeah.
And I think he's extra sensitive to it because of his disability. If he didn't have that identity and he was neurotypical, I wonder if us being like, oh, sorry, would have the same impact. But I don't know. I don't know, because I've only got the one.
And I think there's this hypervisibility that happens when you're disabled, that any teenager is self-conscious about, they're all looking at me.
Yeah, he really needs to know that we have his back, that we see him as just the best kid, which we do.
And I think for parents, there's so much pressure, especially in the early years, do 4 million hours of ABA, do this, do that, this sort of overcoming narrative. And I think resisting that and saying, what's actually best for my kid here, and what's going to empower them? How do they learn best? How do they socialize best? And not only mainstreaming, but also giving a community is key to that. And looking to other parents as sources, not of medical information, right? But of every other dimension of disability culture small stuff like who's a dentist, who's good with kids, who are like orally defensive, all this stuff. You really need community with other parents too.
Yeah, and they have the camps to suggest. That's something we navigate every year, go into the parent groups. Can this camp handle my kid? What have other people's experiences been?
Yeah, I think that's key, is hearing from other parents, for your kid having friends and peers who share their disability so they don't feel like they're the only one. That's something I knew as a queer person and someone who was Jewish, who'd grown up around lots of not Jewish people. You don't want your kid to have the experience of always being the only one. I think that's crucial. And resisting that urge of, I'm not going to get sorted into this disabled pile, not my kid, not me, and beginning to explore disability gain. What benefits are there to the particular ways that your kid thinks that are connected to but not reducible to their disability? I think that is absolutely key. And thinking about who they're going to be, I think finding role models, finding adults in the community, wherever you live, as well as online, who share your kid's disability. What does it look like when they're 20, when they're 30? What does full integration look like at those ages? What are the civil rights struggles and other battles we're still fighting for disabled people as young adults and adults? So I think a lot of parents of small kids feel really afraid of the future, feel afraid to think about it in some way, except through the overcoming lens. We're going to fight this thing, we're going to beat it, and they're going to be just like their siblings. They may not live independently. They can still contribute to something to society. They can still have a good life. And not even still, they will. What does it look like for an adult with your kid's disability? And autism, there's so much diversity, spectrum, whatever language you want to use. For me, it was finding non-speaking autistic women specifically. What does that look like? So I think that's really important for parents to, both in the immediate present, find the peers, find the community, but also find adults who share your kid's disability.
Yeah. So we started with this idea of disability gain, and then you brought it back around to disability gain. So I think that might be a nice place to wrap up. Would that be okay?
Sure. And again, it's not about your kid being a genius, like they have to sing for their supper, they have to be extraordinary to justify their existence as a disabled person. That's BS. And we don't want that. We don't want to impose that on our kids. But every human being is graced with particular talents, interests. It might be the way your kid tells a joke. It might be something very small. That's okay. But seeing in their particularity the way their gifts are woven around their disability. My daughter's relationship to language as a non-speaking person is very unusual. And her poetry, I don't know, I'm not a poet. It'll be for the world to decide, is she a great poet? Whatever. It doesn't matter if she becomes a professional poet or not. To me, honoring and recognizing and helping her develop her particular gifts as a writer, which are inseparable from being non-speaking, is an important part of empowering and recognizing and seeing her. I think that's, for us, been really important, which doesn't mean that there aren't challenges and struggles. I can hear through the internet the eye rolls of parents whose kid is having a meltdown right now. They're like covered in mud and da, 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 da. It was us fighting.
My kid is always going to have these meltdowns, and how are they ever going to?
Right. But I don't want to be defined by my worst moment. I have many flaws. Ask my partner. Like, I have a million challenges. I don't want to be defined by my worst moment. Why would you define your kid that way? Why would you see them as only that? So I think it's not that there aren't challenges, and maybe more challenges that come with a disability that need to be accommodated, that need to be managed, medicated. I'm all for it. I'm all for all of that. And we don't want to be in denial.
Right.
That's ableist in its own way, I think. That's the complexity of this.
It is complex, and I really like how you break it down. The importance of being out about your disability, your child's disability, about disability in general, naming it and claiming it. I loved how, when you talked about being in public, you had a 2-word affirmation or 2-word comeback. We're fine. Yeah, that might not always work to chill people out and get them to keep moving down the aisle, but a lot of times it does. And just having like something in the back of your mind that you can pull out quick. Someone told me to use "we've got this." I use it all the time. I use it on myself. I use it on my child. I use it on the onlookers. But I even like yours is shorter. We're fine.
It's for us to manage. This has nothing to do with you. Why are you staring?
Mhm.
How did your mother raise you? Why do you think this is about you?
It's your problem.
That's your
We're
problem.
fine.
We, first of all, it's us, not you. And we're fine. We have this. We've got this. Exactly. We know what we're doing here. It's fine. We don't need you. But ouch. But it's not aggressive or provocative in that way.
Yeah.
And I think preparing, like assuming those moments are going to happen, I think helps. And having some prepared language.
And knowing you're not the only one.
Yes, absolutely. And sharing with other parents, what do you do in this situation? And hearing now we've got this as well as we're fine. Because what if it looks like we're not fine? Then we got this might be. What if the kid's screaming, but you're actually fine and you know what to do with it, but they're not going to believe that. So say, I've got this. We've got this.
Right. We're capable. And it's like it reminds myself that I'm capable as well. This will end. It's not going to go on forever. It's momentary suffering. Other people experience this. I'm not the only one. I can be kind to myself. I can be kind to my child. I don't have a responsibility to anyone else. I can be polite. Yeah, we got this. I don't say, screw you. Get out of here. Right. Get out of here. On the house. What are you staring at?
And I think it helps my kid when she sees that I'm calm. Like it helps her self-regulate. So yeah, I think having really concrete language helps.
And finally, I don't want to be defined by my worst moment.
I think there's a funny, it's like disaster porn. It's tricky because we want to acknowledge the challenges and difficulties and the hard stuff that can come with a disability without reducing somebody to that. I have many challenges and difficulties in life, and I wouldn't really want my partner or my mother introducing me by explaining like the worst thing about me, or you know what I mean? I think be conscious of that. How do you frame your child and frame their disability? Are you saying they have this disability, but they're a great writer? There's no but. And to say they're not their worst moment, because nobody's their worst moment.
I think this leads into the idea of building community. And one of the struggles for parents is feeling that sense of isolation. And I almost wonder when parents do seek sympathy, if it is a longing and a desire for deeper connection and community, that they're just like mismanaging or getting it not quite right somehow. Because when we seek sympathy, we end up in this loop of not being able to reach out for real, true connection, which is what we're probably longing for. Right.
Yeah. Soon after my daughter's diagnosis, she was in a program that had a parent support group as part of it. First of all, parent was a misnomer. It was all mothers. There were no fathers. We were the only queer couple. We were the only couple, period. I think that is a problem. The idea that what happens a lot, if you have a kid who has a lot of needs and a disability, is one person takes over earning the money and one person gives up their career and gets very gendered. And that has everything to do with our horrible care system. So I think whatever your arrangement, both parents have to be on board for things like support groups. And if they're at times when people are working, do it online. We have many ways of making things flexible now. So I think that's one piece of it. And then the support group, a lot of it was just parents bitching about their kids in the most horrible way. And I empathize that they were having a hard time, but it felt very destructive to me, honestly. And myself and my partner, we became like the co-facilitators almost of the group.
It wasn't really a container around the venting.
Yeah, I think there's a place for venting for all parents. All parents feel frustrations with their kids. But I think those support groups need to be more than that. What they need to do is really promote the idea of disability as identity. a minority identity, connect with disability justice movement, disability rights movement, disability culture. None of that was part of this. It was just parents venting. So I think that's crucial for these parents groups to really become a much more mutual aid. How can we help one another?
How can we help one another?
How can we support one another in thriving, not in complaining and pathologizing our children? Constructive ways of helping one another, whether it's like you need a break. Some of these moms, I think, just needed a break once a week and nobody was giving it to them.
Yeah, and maybe just to get together and talk about something else. I don't know, go for a jog or
Exactly. And that's something we do a lot with other families. If there's not an organization near you, you're like, yes, I'm up for community. I'm past this pathologizing. We started really small. There were just like 2 other families. Almost every weekend, little adventure. Either we hung out at our houses, we went to a movie together, we went hiking, we did stuff that worked for our kids and worked for us. And we didn't just talk about autism. And we connected as people, our kids connected as people. You know, this is like almost 10 years now that we've been doing this. Our kids went through puberty together. Our kids are finding their way. Even though there wasn't like an official group, we started doing that. My partner started this book club that people all over the country participate in who are non-speaking autistics, and their communication partners. And it's such a small thing, but it's meant so much to people. So doing things regularly, this is really concrete, practical, real talk. Finding people who you can stand. First of all, just because you have a kid who's autistic does not mean I want to spend every weekend with you. That is not the basis for a great relationship. So finding the ones who you do feel some other connections and your kid feels it. My kid chose one of these kids as her friend. So who your kid feels a special connection with and who you like, the parents, you connect with them or feel enough similarity, even if it's not a lot. And that's the beginning. It doesn't have to be everyone who happens to have this disability. That's random, right? And doing things that are doable and weekly, but really sticking to it. Like really saying, we're going to do this twice a month, because routinizing it really helps. Our kids need routine. I need routine. I am extremely busy, as is my partner. But if I know every second Sunday we are going to do this, and that's just on my schedule, when my assistant looks at my schedule, they know that's there and that's inviolable. So you have to commit to it and let it evolve and change over time. When other families joined us, there's another family who comes now and then. I am not a big group person. I say this in the book. Like, I am one of those people who has 3 best friends who are like my family. I am not a community leader. I'm a good teacher because you're like one with the many as a teacher, right? And a lot of my work, you have to be alone to do. The kind of research, scholarship, and creative work I do, it takes enormous time alone, actually. You have to have that kind of personality. My partner has a completely different personality and really loves groups. So she took more charge of that. I didn't realize that I needed a group. I think that was a big admission for me to say, I'm isolated in this. I'm alone in this. Even though it goes against my personality, I need to have this regular hanging out in this structured way with these other families. And again, I had my boundaries and limitations. My partner's much more flexible. I was much more, okay, it's just not going to work for me to hang out with them on the regular. So I had to find the ones that worked for me and my kid.
But at some point you realized you needed to make the effort.
I needed to make the effort. I needed to show up, and it was going to be a group thing. That really changed things for us. That's really important. And then just seeing yourself as part of the largest minority in the world. Disabled people, beyond your particular diagnosis, again, the medical stuff, it's all about the particular diagnosis. And when it comes to medication, it better be, right? But medicine and culture are 2 different things. Identity and medicine are 2 different things. So I think there's a whole other side to this that's cultural, that's about being an oppressed minority, advocating for your rights, learning about the amazing self-advocacy that disabled people have done. Our children and parents need to understand this as part of the largest minority group in the world that has an incredible history in which we should take enormous pride and which our children should see themselves. There's the small circle of your local community. There's the larger getting involved with things like the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, connecting to adults who share your child's disability. That's been really important.
Yeah.
Finding OTs, PTs, all the Ts who have this disability. That's been game changing for my daughter, especially when they become teenagers. And following their lead on that.
Following your kids' lead.
Yeah. And then the political and social identity as a minoritized group. We're a biracial family, we're queer, we already see ourselves in that context around other vectors of difference. I've noticed that for like cishet white middle class people, they're so used to
My hand is up. Yeah.
themselves as the norm against which all else, is valued. That's sort of a sea change, but that can be disability gain for parents to see what it's like to be minoritized and marginalized.
My evolution as a human being in yoga and meditation, we think about enlightenment. Nothing's brought me closer to liberation and enlightenment and my world opening up than getting over my internalized bias, my implicit bias, and really interrogating that. Nothing.
Yeah. So it's an opportunity for enormous growth, right?
An opportunity for enormous growth for those of us who are the cishet white middle class.
Yeah. And I felt, I know so much about difference. I know so much about being marginalized. I know so much about queer gain in a way. I already knew a lot from my experience as a queer person that I could use. And then there was all this growth and learning about disability. So I think we can bring a lot from other life experiences. For you, it might be from yoga, from what you already know about difficulty and pain being opportunities for learning, and that not just being like this cringe cliche thing, but actually true.
Numbing is not the way to feel better.
That there's something, if you stay awake and pay attention, you actually might learn something and grow. Who knew?
That's yoga in a nutshell, really.
I've made a million mistakes as a parent. That's part of parenting. I would as with any kid, because that's part of being human and parenting. But I do feel like we're on this journey together as a family and with my daughter, and that there's incredible opportunity for learning and growth for all of us in this, and that it's collective, that it's not this problem to be solved alone through medicine. It's this collective endeavor that's about identity as well as objective impairment. And I think that's where we get stuck sometimes.
So Jennifer Natalya Fink, what do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered for two things. One is really changing this conversation around disability and disability lineage in particular, and opening up the possibilities for how we value, name, and claim disabled people in our lineage in the past, so that we leave a legacy that's better for the future. That's really what it's about. And that's where I end up in my book, is thinking about that. This is a legacy. Your relationship to disability is a legacy you leave for future generations. That's one piece of it. And then through my daughter, I think she's my legacy in a lot of ways. Who she is in the world is so amazing to me. So Nadia is who I want to be remembered for, really.
So can we end with a parenting memory that brings you joy?
There are several. Her bat mitzvah was this amazing moment for us, in that I saw so much of her cousins shining through her and her grandmother, of all her disability lineage, down to the dress she chose, which was this blingy dress that it was an unusual, shall we say, combination of colors that my grandmother Adina would have adored, and her embracing of the spiritual in a way quite different from me. Her way of naming and claiming that was so different from mine. And they are boogieing down every day. She has her Nadia dance that I do as well. I think those everyday moments are so important and joyful. And every time I read her poems, they are not like anyone else's, just so irreducibly Nadia.
I can really feel that, how she shines both with her choice of her dress and in so many ways, and how that lights you up.
Yeah, it does. The challenges are real, but so is the joy. And I think they're not entirely inseparable.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say about community?
It's one of those words that can feel abstract. Start where you are. That's crucial, that you don't feel like you have to go out and, oh, my life is so stressful and working, and my kid has a disability, and now I have to find this community. Are there two other families that you know of? Can you ask if there are other communities you're a part of? Say you're part of a synagogue or a church or something like that, or Tuesday night knitting club. Start really small and local. And then also look online at this really rich world of disability justice, disability culture, disability arts, beyond your own kid's particular diagnosis. So I think thinking really small and local and doable on the one hand, but really doing it, and then really big in this other way. I think that's, for me, been what makes it meaningful and not just an abstraction. And this from a self-professed introvert, right? That's being realistic about, there are two families I can do this with once a month. That's okay. Start small and doable, but really do it. And then really look at the big picture, which is exciting and rich and diverse.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful place to end. How can people find you and your book? I will put the links in the show notes.
Yes, find it on Amazon, get it at your local bookstore through Penguin Random House. It is an audiobook narrated by a person with a disability. The cover was designed by an autistic person. Ask your library to buy it, get the word out.
And the article in Mother Magazine, the interview that we did, and then you also have a New York Times op-ed piece.
Yeah, that's the book in a nutshell. Jennifer Natalya Yup. That's my Instagram handle. I'm happy to come speak to parenting groups, organizations, schools, etc. You can contact me or you can contact Beacon Press. And I love to hear what people think about the book. So feel free to reach out to me.
The book changed my life. I'm so grateful for it. It's been quite a journey. And thank you so much for initiating this journey for me. And thank you so much for talking with our community here. I really appreciate it. I'm grateful for you.
I'm grateful for you, Kate, and I think you're doing amazing work. So back at you, and let's keep building community.
Thank you for joining Atypical Kids Mindful Parents. I really appreciate you walking alongside me.